Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi, I'm Amy and I'm an alcoholic. Is that clock right? Or this clock? Yeah, okay, good. Mike, thank you for asking me. I'm always pleased to share. Well, that's not true. I'm always pleased when it's over. I used to love to talk, to share in a meeting. That is no longer true. Because I've heard a lot of people say this. The longer they're sober, the less they feel they know. And that is the truth for me. I feel more fortunate than ever. And happy birthday to the two people who celebrated birthdays, and thank you, Mike, for your sharing. I haven't been in a meeting since last Sunday, which is unusual for me, but in the last couple of months that hasn't been unusual. I've been traveling a lot, and can you hear? No? And at any rate, is that better? Okay, good. That was all the good part. Now the rest is... I've been traveling more than I have in the past, and so therefore I have been going to fewer meetings than normal. Normally I go to 3 to 4 meetings a week, and I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm very glad to be back in town to be able to go to meetings. What I was doing is I was in New Orleans for the last week, and I was at a conference, and it wasn't possible to go to a meeting. But I'll tell you, I had all of the experience of Alcoholics Anonymous and the meetings that I've gone to really support my sobriety there. And not just my sobriety, because that's not the only thing that was happening. I mean my behavior. And I'll tell you a little bit about that because it's what's going on in my life. But let me back up a little bit and tell you about my story, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. First of all, I am the child of 2 alcoholics, big family. I don't even know how many of us are alcoholics and how many not, because what's happening is that those that weren't alcoholic like I was, which is like blow the doors off kind of alcoholic, there are those that have been what I thought temperate drinkers, or easy on alcohol, and who at this time in their lives are beginning to display this alcoholic thing. So possibly 100% of my family is alcoholic. Doesn't matter. We've all been affected by the disease of alcoholism. But the long and short of it is this, is that I grew up hating what alcohol did, on the one hand. And then on the other hand, I grew up absolutely fascinated and attracted by what alcohol did. And here's how it went. In my house, I'm, as I said, from a big family, and I named it myself the Brawling Brophies because that's what it was like. But my mother, while drinking, used to begin to fight, and usually my stepfather. But, there would be these things going on, and I hated that. I was frequently up at night listening to this, terrified, in the bed, and, just knowing what was going on. And I knew why that was. I knew it was because of the alcohol and so on and so forth. And so I was the kind of kid, 6 years old, 7 years old, that frequently accompanied my mom to the hospital while she was having alcoholic seizures, saw all the heartbreak, saw all of that stuff, saw the brawls break out and promises broken and her do things that I knew she would never have done had she been sober. So I hated alcohol on that note. On the other hand, there was this glamour associated with alcohol because, for example, when my grandmother came into town, my grandmother was the one she was the matriarch, she had all the money. And so whenever she came into town, there was a big to-do around her coming into town. And that would include, pulling out all of the crystal and dishes and we'd eat in the dining room rather than in the kitchen or wherever, the breakfast room. And all this beautiful stuff. And a big thing was made over her wine. Now, she wasn't an alcoholic. But I could see all of this, and it just appealed to me. I just loved all of that because that was alcohol where I didn't see the connection with that kind of thing and what was happening in the same house with my mom and the rest. But so I had that dual message going. But I did decide that I would have the glamorous life and not drink. I made that decision as a kid, and I did not want that. And I thought that I'd be smarter and, avoid all of that stuff and just go on, and I would just avoid all of that difficulty. And what ended up happening, quite simply, is by the time I was 14, someone offered me a drink. I drank, I got drunk, and I drank from that point forward. That's all it took. It was like taking a match to a little pilot, just a poosh, just all it took. And I'm not the kind of drinker who really sat down and mapped out why I was having a drink. I just got it on an intuitive level. It worked for me. It worked. It made me comfortable. I couldn't have explained that to you. It made me easy in a world in which I was absolutely uncomfortable and am still. And I drank like this. I wanted out. I drank for blackout and beyond. I did not want to go kind of tipsy. I wanted to go for it, and just that's what I wanted, and that's how I drank. And I've come to realize that the reason for that is that I could not stand how I felt. And so the quickest line between myself and oblivion is the one I wanted, That's how I drank. And but on the other hand, things are seldom that simple, at least at first. And what I also wanted was to achieve things in my life. I wanted to do well. I wanted to get things. I wanted to prove myself. I had a lot to prove. In fact, I think in part I still do. I think that I need to prove something. I need to make a show. Show people that I can do something. And it's not true. I do a lot of inventory about that. But at any rate, so I had these two tracks going, the need to check out and the need to show up and, make some kind of success of myself, And so for a long time, that was something that confused me because like what you were talking about, when you set your mind to something, you could do it. I don't know if I would say that about myself so much as I would say, I desperately wanted to be okay. So therefore, there were things that I had established that would be the things that would make me okay. They were the things that I thought would make me bulletproof. They were the things that would set me free. And for me, that was a great education. It was being free. I didn't want to have to need anybody. And the path that I saw with that, because I was unable to form a bond with just about anybody, that I would do it by myself and I didn't need any help, and that's the path I took. So I did have success in that way. I did get a lot of things and I made some successes. But as will happen with this disease is it just eroded and ate away at everything that was going on because I could not sustain a sober life. One of the most difficult things that I had to do was show up. It's one of the biggest gifts that I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous is showing up on a absolutely consistent basis, whether you want to or not. It's one of the biggest gifts that I've gotten, second only to not drinking. You know, that you can show up, you can come back, or it says down here, keep coming back. That was such incredible news for me, that I could just keep coming back, because I was also a geographic taker. If there was any problem or difficulty whatsoever, I'd blast out of here and go to another country and go to another neighborhood, go to another place, and then start over. And if that got difficult, and it was bound to, because life's like that, then I would just go somewhere else. And still in all, that's the story. I was a geographic taking alcoholic who had some measure of success. But what ended up happening, just like the book says, women's drinking frequently is marked by, you know, like a precipitous drop, you know, like a quick falling off. Well, mine did, you know, that's what happened. And pretty soon, I couldn't go out. You know, I couldn't accomplish anything without drinking. I was full of fear, more notable fear that would keep me from going. And it wasn't helped by drinking. It wasn't stopped by drinking. And so therefore, I just started, I did anything I could to stop those feelings. And so that's why I like to drink to black out. Finally, the way that it ended up is that I ended up, just to culminate the story of the drinking, there are two parts that I shouldn't leave out. One is that I tried to control my drinking. I had established that I had a drinking problem like you did. I knew that by the time I was 19. I knew that I had a problem drinking. So I set about the business of trying to control and enjoy that, and it included everything. I had lots of big plans, lots of ways to do that. Some of them made sense, most of them didn't. I even stopped drinking. That's good. Most alcoholics don't do that. When they establish that they have a drinking problem, they just stop talking about it. But you know, I actually stopped drinking. And what ended up happening, though, is I discovered that I could not stay stopped, as we say here, you know. What would end up happening is that some celebration, usually not a big drama, but some celebration would come in that would force me to have a drink. Some big celebration like Tuesday. And, you know, I just have to have a drink. And so I drank. And if I were to drink, and if I am to drink now, what happens is that I have to keep drinking. That is who I am. That is how I drink. And so I didn't know anything about that. Of course, here we know what that's all about. It's the first drink gets you drunk, but I didn't know that. You know, I thought it was those later ones that got me, but I could control those first dozen, you know, I don't know. Just, I could do that. I could go there and then stop when I wanted, but I didn't know that. So whenever I drank, I was destined to go off on a run. Now, another thing, I say this because the one thing that I was so terribly ashamed of growing up is the violence in my home behind alcohol. You know, that was the secret within our home. You know, it did not show out in the street. I mean, but what you said was true. The police came all the time, so who did I think we were kidding? I don't know, but police were there, ambulances, those kinds of regular neighborhood occurrences, you know. And so people knew, but I thought that they didn't know. And I was very ashamed of that. And so I didn't want people to know that I had a problem with drinking. So in order to admit that I had a problem, I had to admit to some people that I had a problem with drinking in order to get somewhere, to come out and say that. And so I wasn't prepared to do that. I thought that people didn't know, which was, I heard this woman speak once. She said that she thought she was invisible. And apparently I must have too, because the way I drink, it was not easy. It was, you would notice, you know, you would notice a person drinking the way that I drank. So finally what ended up happening, and this is what I mean, the police noticed the way I drank. And so they threw me in the back of the police car with handcuffs. And, you know, I was kicking them because I didn't want to go. And I was drunk, of course, and kicking with all my might. And so they took my belt and, you know, tied my feet together and threw me in the back of the police car. And I used my head to smash the window out of the car. So alcoholic using her head, just that's what I did. I did not want to be stopped from drinking. I did not want to be stopped from anything that was my plan. And so at any rate, they proceeded, and I was thrown into a 72-hour hold. They kept me there instead of just arresting me, and that was the beginning of my not being able to tell myself that people did not know how I drank. Because now the police knew, the hospital knew, my entire family knew. Everybody could see this, and so it was harder to deny that. I wasn't done yet, though. I mean, I had countless vain attempts to stop drinking. I tried to control it. I took Antabuse. I stopped drinking, as I mentioned. I went to other countries. I had new plans, big ideas, a healthy plan, the way that I was going to, live the right kind of life. But if you're an alcoholic like I am, the only thing that will help you is if you stop drinking. And I also included a mammoth use of drugs in its place. And for a while, I simply substituted. It worked for a while, and then it made me incredibly thirsty. So I, had to drink. What I'm telling you is that in the end, I was thrown in the hospital, locked up, so on and so forth. And finally, it was as though God had got to me and said, "Look, you're really in trouble now. This is the thing that I had to get. You're really in trouble now," because I kept getting by with things. I kept, it was getting tighter and tighter, but I kept getting by. And then a friend of mine in the program says, every one of us here has a story wherein something happens. And this was my something happened. I didn't know it at the time, but I was in the hospital. They wouldn't let me leave. I'd been there for a couple of days. And the idea came for me, just a minute, just a little flash, like a little tiny opening. You did not survive all of this for nothing. And then went away. Just went away. And I left the hospital ultimately, and I was faced with a couple of things. I thought, now how am I going to live sober in Los Angeles? Because I had established that it was my friends, in Los Angeles that was the problem. And so I went back up north, and I immediately started stealing drugs out of somebody's medicine cabinet, because I can't live this life without something, So ultimately what ended up happening is that I had to return to LA, and through a series of circumstances, my own sister 12-stepped me. And she took me, or actually she came to see me, and I always say this, my sister and I at that time had nothing in common. Absolutely nothing common except for perhaps our alcoholism. And I didn't like her, and she did not like me. And what ended up happening is that when I was in trouble, my mother called her and asked her to come and speak to me. Not speak to her, my mother, who could have used it too, but come and speak to me. And she did. And what was happening there is just like the story that you told. I had one of those moments where it was not my sister really who was speaking to me, although of course it was. It was another alcoholic talking to me. She came in at that time, she was 9 years sober. And she came in and she talked to me, and she talked to me like one alcoholic talks to another. And I don't know how this happened, but somehow or the other she got to me the idea. She didn't sell me on this idea. She simply offered that somebody would come and get me if I wanted, and I did. I said, okay. And so someone came and got me and took me to the Pacific Group, which is what maybe her little part. But that's where I got sober there for the first 4.5 years of my sobriety, and I absolutely needed to be there, because by that time, through the drinking and also the drugs, I was unable to function in society. I kept thinking that what I really needed to do was just get out there and resume my life, but the fact of the matter was I could not. I did not know how to. I needed to be in a very safe place where not a lot was asked of me, to be honest. I had owned my own business and was very successful at that, and my first job in sobriety was being a receptionist in a beauty salon. where there were 6 operators, and it was all I could do. I cried at the end of every single solitary day. During the weekdays, I would total up all 22 checks that would come in, and I could never get them to balance. And I would weep into the night, and trying to get this thing to work out. And it was that I needed, and is to be able to start slowly and start over. And all I could keep thinking about was, when am I going to get mine? When am I going to get my big deal job? It never occurred to me that I could not have done that, that I could not face that. And little by little, I guess I'm going to talk about my job. I never know what I'm going to talk about. But so I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and one of the things that happened is my sister's friend came and picked me up. He took me to a meeting. He took me to the Wednesday night meeting of the Pacific Group. I had never seen so many people in my entire life. But just to show you how funny we are, on the one hand, I thought, there are too many people in here. I was terrified. And on the other hand, I thought, well, now, because someone pointed out to me there was this man that was a published writer, the ego of the alcoholic, I thought, well, now I'm amongst my peers. I have never written a thing in my life, but I just thought that was where I belonged. So anyway, there I was, unwilling to talk to anybody for a long time. And so then came the thing of commitments. I got a sponsor almost immediately. I had been sober and alcoholics once before for the duration of 7 meetings. This time, I thought it would be a good idea if I got a sponsor, and I was terrified of this woman. She seemed to ask way too much, One of the things that she did is she came stamping up to me. I'm sure she walked over, but it seemed to me that she came running up to me and told me that I should speak to her when I come to a meeting. I thought that was a lot to ask. But, those kinds of things, show up on time, that sort of thing. But the main thing was the commitments. It was through that, because I was not a person who would involve myself. I was a little kid, teenager, always did things by myself. It was always going to be under my own steam. And so the idea that I was going to do this with other people, that the first word of the first step is we. That I would do this amidst this community was something I did not know how to do. It was absolutely foreign to me, that idea. And so I didn't even know how to wedge myself into that. I didn't know how to talk to people. I was afraid of everyone. And so when I had these commitments, when I was cleaning ashtrays is what it was. Cleaning ashtrays was the first one, and cleaning benches off, and so on and so forth. I would stay after the meeting and hang around people that were sober, and in that way get to know them. And it was a more manageable group of people that I could get to know. And that is the only way that I sort of eased my way back into a social life. Alcoholics Anonymous did that for me. And not everybody comes into AA that is that far behind, but that is where I was. And I needed every bit of that to be able to help myself. So I got commitments. Then I started working the steps. I started to do those things, and every bit of it terrified me. I was a person who did not necessarily want to know how I felt about things. And so the first inventory, I remember I wrote down, I resent my mother. And came this feeling. I was in her house when I was writing it, and this feeling was come up like flames from inside of me, and she walked out to where I was right in that moment. And I looked at her, and she didn't know what I was doing, and it scared me to death. It scared me to death. I had not allowed myself to feel that stuff. I drank like crazy because I didn't want to feel that stuff, I could not handle it. I could not handle things like people looking at me funny. It is sort of a funny life, because in another way, I managed my whole business. How did I do that? I don't know. But somehow or altogether, Alcoholics Anonymous has allowed me in very slow, always slowly, it says sometimes slowly, always slowly, putting back the pieces of me, and in many cases not even having had them in the first place. In my work life, what ended up happening is that through the example of Alcoholics Anonymous and the ability to just keep showing up, keep showing up, keep showing up, keep showing up, no matter what, we don't care if you like it, just keep showing up, keep showing up. I have had this incredible career. I'm not making appointments at the beauty salon anymore. And I have a great life. But every bit of that has been a struggle. Every bit of that has been a struggle. I have had 6 sponsors in Alcoholics Anonymous, 1 twice. And God has given to me in exactly the right time the woman in my life to learn how to become closer with somebody and intimate with somebody in this setting, to learn how to tell the truth the minute I know it. Because I was a person who lied, didn't even know I was lying, just blip, 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 blip. And so sometimes I'd be talking, I think, that's not true, it's not true. And then I would have to call and say, that was with the phone, that wasn't exactly true. It was more like this. And I credit that more with allowing me to stand here. Well, the guy that took the cake said that, about honesty, or Chip. I credit that more with my being able to stand here and feel okay, is the ability to tell the truth as quickly as I know it. As quickly as I know it, because it's kind of a moving line for me. I'm all over the place tonight. I'm sorry. I left New Orleans at 3 o'clock in the morning this morning, and then I flew to San Francisco, and I got here at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm a little bit out of it, but I want to tell you a little bit about that experience. When I go and do these things in business, I'm always surprised. I'm surprised that I'm sober. I'm totally surprised that I'm sober. I am not a person who should be sober. And when I reduce it to the level of look at Amy, you're sober, it's a fantastic thing. I get really excited. But in this particular instance, I was there for 5 days with my boss and another senior guy from my company. And we went to this conference. And we went to breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it was a lot of food and a lot of alcohol and no escape. I can't leave and say, well, I guess I'm going to sit this one out, because I can't, And so for the most part, these people know that I don't drink. And at one point last night, it was the first and only time that this happened. They were pouring wine all around the table, and very small table, and there were about 8 of us there, and they poured some red wine for me. Well, I'm a wino. Of course, I'd drink anything, but I'd rather have wine. And, so they poured this thing. And this is cunning, baffling, and powerful. It is exactly the setting that always seduced me. It's a beautiful restaurant. People are having a great time, and it's expensive wine. Now, believe me, I drank silver satin, so it doesn't always have to be like that. But I looked at it, and here's what I thought. He poured it and disappeared before I could say, no, take that away. And I was like this with this wine. But these 2 thoughts are going. Number 1, I'm thinking, where'd he go get this out of here? I don't even want it in front of me. And on the other hand, I thought, isn't that a beautiful color? And that's how it starts. It was a beautiful color. But there were so many glasses on this table that I was very stressed out. This situation, when I said that I'm a person who does not move easily in this world, that is true. I was telling Chris on the way over here, we're talking about being grateful in work. I pray a lot in my job. I pray a lot. I say, God, come with me, be with me, because I'm full of fear, even still. Inventory. I'm just full of fear. That's why I drank. That's why I use the steps of this program, because I need it to move in this world. That's the truth. And so God always helps me, but never as fast as I wish he would. But so this thing is sitting there in front of me, and instead of drinking, I did an awful lot of eating these last few days. Like I was so scared. I was kind of nervous about this whole thing. But in the course of that, I thought 2 or 3 times I almost reached up and grabbed that glass. Not because I wanted a glass of wine, but because it was right in front of me. And I said to the man sitting next to me, I said, will you take this because I don't, oh, this is funny. I don't want this. I don't drink. He says, wine cures cancer. Oh. So anyway, but but I guess what I'm saying mostly is that for the most part I move in my life with with tools to be able to opt for some ease, because I get really scared. I get really afraid of what people are thinking, and they're probably not even thinking about me, but I do go there, and I think they're probably making more money than I am, and then I get a resentment. I don't know. This probably never occurs to you, and I think things like, well, all right, here was another thing. This was a television conference, and they had a lot of the talent there, and not the least of which there were 2 booths for the Baywatch contingency. And, we're going back and forth, and these women are there in the bathing suits, you do this enough times, walking back and forth, and all the men are like in a trance, I got a resentment. And I just thought, hey, I don't know. I do, but that's just me in life, Or I go and call on somebody in a booth, and they don't pay due attention in a timely manner, because there are lots of conditions in my life. I don't know if you have those too, but maybe they don't pay what I think is the right kind of attention, or maybe they may pay more attention to that one, and that's what inventories are for. But I'm just talking about my life. And right now, outside of work, and so let me go back. I talked to my sponsor from New Orleans. I wrote inventory from New Orleans. I prayed in New Orleans. I asked God to help me. Walking and seated, I did this because I know that this allows me to live. It allows me to have my life. And I write down what is the truth. I now have a dialogue with in written form with my higher power, where I'm able to tell the truth there. And always, always, always sets me free. And so one of the things that I thought that I found, when I was in New Orleans, is that I'm more than happy to surrender to a higher power, but sometimes it feels awfully hard, It feels awfully hard, and sometimes it feels to me like a parent who says, this is for your own good. And I don't like that feeling. And the minute I wrote that down, I felt better. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that anymore. And I don't know why that happens. There's a couple of other things I want to talk about. I'm active in Alcoholics Anonymous because I don't want to drink. I do not want to drink, and I believe that I could drink like that. I believe that. I believe that I practice a good program, but I see that there are people all around who just drink like that. And that there's a particular kind of insanity that comes in that we are not able to control, that cunning, baffling, powerful part. This is no match for us. It will beat us every single time. That is a fact. I know that. And so I need a higher power for that. I also need the reinforcement of these meetings. I come to these meetings, I like to say this, to treat my amnesia. I begin to think that I'm very different. And I sit here, and you take a cake and talk about all you wanted was to be a sober woman. And I thought, oh yeah, I never bargained for this trip to New Orleans thing. I mean, it didn't even occur to me. So I'm way ahead of the game here, and so I'm so glad that you said that. And happy birthday, that was wonderful. And the other thing is that I work with other alcoholics. I love working with women who are in my life, and I have a sponsor who is really active, and whenever I call her, she says, You know, Amy, be your own best friend. Be nice to yourself. Treat yourself like you would like to be treated. See what you can do in that way. And then reach out to that new girl, because she just might die. That's what she says. And it really reduces everything to that. You know, have you talked to somebody new? And I'm sober a little while, and you know, it never ceases to be true. That works. That works and takes the focus off of oneself, off of me. Right now in my life, I'm facing something that is really very, very difficult. My mom had 3 strokes in the beginning of October. And I'm crazy about my mom, but we have had one of these relationships that is very troubled, you know. And she never got sober, totally clean. She stopped drinking, but anyway, she does her thing. So she had this stroke, and these strokes, and you know, I always want to practice a program where I love somebody, and ultimately there's a big turnaround, if not immediately. You know, that's what I'm always shooting for. And this is one of those situations where that's not happening. You know, my mom's strokes have caused her to be very angry. I mean, that is kind of her permanent state now. And she doesn't want anything to do with the family. She doesn't want to have anything to do. She has cut us all out, and she's very ill. And she's probably not going to live very long. And you know, this is a program for all conditions, I'm told, you know, in all circumstances. And I love her, and I would really like it to be okay. You know, I would really like us to have some kind of peace. But instead of her getting more peaceful, she becomes more agitated and angry and goes to that place. And you know, all that's left to me now is that I have to keep asking God to help me and to help her too, you know, and then just let it go. I had some fantasy in my mind that my mom and I would, you know, be able to work it out. When I heard women who got up at these podiums and they talked about their relationships, and they were like in their 20s and they never could mend with their mom, in the back of my mind the old idea was, that's not going to happen to me. We're going to be able to do it. And you know what? That may not happen. I'm saying that to you when I should be saying that to me. And it is so very, very, very difficult. I'm really having to just let it go. And there's nothing I can do. You know, there's nothing I can do. I always thought that you know, the amends would fix it. So why I'm saying that is because people here share from this podium about things that are going on in their lives that are present, that are going on right now. I really don't know what's going to happen. But I have to let it go. And it's very hard. And so, you know, I reach out to the women that I know for support, you know, and just keep praying. I guess that's the only thing. I'll finish by saying this. You never know what's going to happen. About a year ago, almost a year, well, in a week, my brother came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is a brother, see, it never goes the way you think it's going to go. My brother and I, he's a year older than I am, and he had been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous before and left because it wasn't for him. And then ultimately came back because he had to, because he's one of us. And in the last year, the gift has been my relationship with him. And that is completely it was just a treasure. I just didn't know that there could be such a thing. And so, you know, on the one hand I have this thing with my mom, and on the other hand I have this thing with my brother. And you never know what's going to happen. Chris and I were talking about the people that show up in your life when you need them. You know, you just have to go along with what it is. I really can't find a way to wind this up except for to say this, that I am so deeply grateful for my sobriety. And thank you for letting me share.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.